Ian, in your investigation over a year and a half, you reported on murder, piracy, slavery, possible illegal fish entering into the United States. Um, it was an amazing set of articles, but I guess my question to you is, out of everything that you covered, was there anything that was actually surprising to you to find out about during your investigation?
I mean, truth be told, it was all surprising to me. I expected to find, a beautiful, vast space out there that had some degree of lawlessness, but not the degree that we found. So I guess in the sort of high concept sense, I was most struck by how complicated a space it is and how difficult I think fixes will be ultimately, because it is the tragedy of the global commons, and it is a space, the high seas in particular, that belong to no one and everyone. And that haunted me to some degree throughout the series. It's not easily solved. And on the other hand, philosophically, it does seem like the ultimate challenge for nations and people, because where else is there a place other than maybe space and the atmosphere, the other commons, where A, the urgency is as great, and B, there's only going to be sort of coalition and cooperation. It's the only way that fixes will occur. So just in terms of governance, I think that whole notion of what can be done to better police it, and to, I guess I was also struck a little bit by, there does seem to be, much thanks to Pew and other players, a fair amount of momentum now on IUU and attempting to protect, starting to protect the environment. There is woeful absence when it comes to protecting the people. And that I found sort of one of the darker realizations, that that realm is lagging in terms of discussion, in terms of action, and in terms of mechanisms.
Thanks, Ian. I wonder, being a non-policy wonk and someone who actually, I think, raised a number of these issues in your story, and maybe you might touch on an anecdote or two to kind of give some of the audience some of the flavor of some of the difficulty that you found in your story. But I wonder if you had some thoughts about this particular issue that you really covered extensively in your piece.
I think Russell touched on some points I hope to make, both with John's question. I do think market power, I do think, if the biggest players, the biggest purchasers were to lead, the US government, for example, is a major institutional purchaser of fish, and if they wanted to lead by example, they would adjust their purchasing policy and only buy traceable fish, and that would affect the marketplace. And I think that's how it begins, probably faster than regulation. I do think that transshipment in sea is a big elephant in the room, and traceability becomes tough until the problem of fish being offloaded to other vessels at sea is confronted. And I do think technology like SkyTruth and sort of satellites watching for that can help significantly. In terms of anecdotes, I have to think about that a little bit. I think that the story that focused on sea slaves and the time the photographer and I spent on one vessel in particular, which was a Thai-flagged fishing vessel far off the coast in the South China Sea, manned by 40 trafficked, indentured Cambodian, mostly boys. That sort of confronted us with what the reality of both transshipment looks like. A lot of that fish that they were catching was transshipped, and it's exactly how those young men and boys were able to be out there for a year and a half and not have come to shore, and sort of the precursor to slave-like conditions. And it gets back to the port state control issue as well. If the ships are not coming back to shore, then the ability to inspect the labor or the fish or their records as to where they supposedly have been becomes very limited. So I think that transshipment at sea is going to have to be a huge issue to tackle.
Okay, great. We have more questions from the audience.
Thanks, Matt. It's John Briley from Pew. I know most of you. Ian, I direct this at you and also Dan, possibly. This is going back to the question that Michael asked, but a little bit more of an elaboration. The Thunder was chased out of the Southern Ocean by an advocacy group and then pursued for almost 4 months. Who actually, I mean, Michael hinted at it strongly that I guess it was Nigeria, the flag state, probably had responsibility for that vessel, but I'd ask, your collective opinions on that. And then even if the law had actually been carried out to its intended conclusion, would that have stopped the illegal fishing? The law would have provided for what? Nigeria to send a vessel to the Southern Ocean to board and inspect? Just could you offer some clarity on what international law would have called for there, and had it actually been carried out, would it have had a good result?
So I'm very pessimistic about this matter, the flag state control issue. So the Thunder is the illegal vessel that was in the fourth story, for those that didn't read the series. And it was a long and notorious illegal vessel, estimated over $60 million worth of IUU, toothfish, over a decade. It had changed flags many times. Its last flag was Nigeria. It was deflagged during the chase. And I'm skeptical about the effectiveness, even in the best of cases, of a flag program like Nigeria catching up with a crime like this, because of the sort of, the resources that do not exist, the incentive that does not exist for a flag registry to actually investigate and prosecute a crime. The structural incentive is to blacklist or just simply deflag a vessel and sort of move away from them. And that seems to be a pattern on the high seas. At best you see sort of a moving away from. That's a significant law enforcement action by flag states often. Again, not the British, the American, but this other realm of flag registries that are more famous for flagging illegal players. So I'm not sure, and just the reality of how these programs run, the notion that they would put law enforcement on a vessel and go pursue them and try to prosecute them. They don't have the lawyers, they don't have the skill set, they don't have the money, and those are their clients ultimately. That's, the Thunder is what kept the registry in business. So I think in that case, you had Sao Tome and Principe, really step up in the end of the story. And it's a story that's still unfolding. There's a trial next month. In 2 weeks, this month, of several of the officers. And a lot has happened there, but largely because of the attention that the advocacy group put on the vessel. On the other hand, I think the point that Kristen makes is really spot on, in that if you look, for example, at the Spanish right now and Operation Sparrow, and Operation Sparrow 2, which is coming up, you do see some countries that are starting to take this problem more seriously and tackle the sort of conglomerates, or the word you use, the syndicates that exist. And they are international syndicates. More often than not, they're very well known. But the crime usually occurs over there, so it's someone else's stuff that's being stolen, even if the bad guys are based in our country. So are we going to really take this on? It's not in our jurisdiction. It's a lot of effort to sort of help someone else from whom we have what tie, what responsibility? Some countries are starting to think differently. They're starting to think, wait a minute, this affects us all. This is money laundering. This is other sorts of crimes that this one syndicate that's been long based in our country is involved in, and we need to tackle it on principle, but for lots of other self-interested reasons too. And I think the more you see that, the more you're going to see the Thunders of the world be put out of business.